Yeah, I thank Jared for his thoughts in our prayer, in his prayer, just to remind us again that the idea of the study is not to downtrodden upon the apostles. Um, it's, of course, we learn from our mistakes as they did, and we learn from their mistakes, and we're also encouraged and strengthened by their show of their courage. So just good to remind ourselves of that as we study each of them. But today then, we wanted to look at John 12, verses 20 to 22, and we're going to read about the Apostle Philip in this study, and we'll see how far we get through with Philip. But John 12, verses 20 to 22, John says, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.' Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus." And then we go on to see from there how Jesus replied. So this thought here is thinking of Philip. Was this a troublesome hesitation on Philip's part of going to Andrew first, asking Andrew first before just taking the Greeks to see Jesus? Or my other thought was this obedience on Philip's part? And our scene here probably takes place in the court of the Gentiles at the temple. Remember, this was the Passover feast. There'd be thousands of people in Jerusalem at the temple. There'd be people coming to worship at the temple, and Gentiles also came to worship at the temple in those times. But they had a court where they were allowed to come into. So the word Greeks here, I thought we'll kind of figure out who these people were. But that word, the Greeks, is translated Gentiles back in chapter 7 and verse 35 of John. And so we're pretty sure that we don't want to confuse these Greeks with Grecian Greeks. Grecian Greeks were Jews that lived abroad, okay? And they spoke the Greek language. If you remember Acts 7, when the Grecian Jews were seeking some assistance in the church, and there was, through some reading and study, there was even among Christians, sometimes we can be a little less understanding. The Grecian Jews, the real Jews, blood Jews, kind of looked down a little bit on the Grecian Jews. And that shouldn't be so, but that was the nature of the times. So there's two possibilities then, I thought, on who these Greeks were. They were either Gentiles who became proselytes of the gate, is what they were called, and those were attracted to the one God of Judaism, but they had not been circumcised, okay? And then the second group is just simply Gentiles and idolaters, and they did come at the feast of the Passover. They would come and they would offer their gifts to Israel's God. And so, having said that, which of these two is hard to tell? It's hard to tell which Jews, which Gentiles, Greeks that we're speaking of. But we do know for a fact that the outer court of the temple was called the court of the Gentiles, and it was for Gentiles to worship in. And if you recall back in 1 Kings, if you go back to 1 Kings and chapter 8, you find something interesting there that explains this court of the Gentiles. Verse 41 to 43. Jeremy, I'll give you that to you, and Naomi, I'll give you chapter 9 in verse 3.
Moreover, concerning a foreigner who is not of your people Israel, but has come from a far country for your name's sake, for they will hear of your great name and your strong hand and your outstretched arm, when he comes and prays towards this temple, hear in heaven your dwelling place, and do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you, that the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, and that they may know that this temple which I have built is called by your name.
In this passage, Solomon here is asking for the privilege of foreigners, of Greeks, of anyone who wasn't of Israel to come and pray at the temple. And so chapter 9 and verse 3, Naomi.
And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer in this plea, which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time.
Okay. From that verse we know that God granted Solomon his prayer, what he asked for. And I also thought that was, with Solomon, that was probably, not sure if that would be the first example of evangelism or not, but it certainly, Solomon's goal was, doesn't matter who it is, come to the temple and learn about our God. Sure.
Of course, he was married to some of them too.
Well,
right. I guess, sorry, is there
that's true, but
it is. No, I understand. I'm
yeah.
not saying that's his motive, but I'm saying like that's quite an ask, because like as far as the people of God are the ones who are promised God will hear, and Solomon is asking that if they come here and worship you here,
right,
that you will hear them, and so that's Solomon is not saying they come worship some other God here.
Right.
They come and worship you here. Please hear them.
Right. And that, I use that to show the meaning of the court for the Gentiles. That was the privilege that they were granted. So then we see that worship alone wasn't the only thing that was on the minds of these Greeks. They wanted to meet Jesus. That was their goal. And upon arrival, we're told that they came to Philip. And with that, I thought, why might that have been? Why did they come to Philip? Had they met Philip before? Because it's interesting that John mentions Philip's hometown here, as though it was important to the story. We didn't really need to know that. But by John mentioning it, tells me that it's an important part of the city, of the story. And having said that, also Philip's name being Greek and Bethesda his hometown might explain why they approached Philip. He was familiar to them, maybe. They were from Bethesda. He has a Greek name. Maybe they knew him there. And his name is a Greek name, just simply meaning lover of horses. But it's interesting that the 12 apostles were Jews, but we are not ever given Philip's Jewish name or Andrew's Jewish name. So again, just the thought of the Greeks coming, either recognized that his name was a Greek name, or as I said, maybe he was. They knew him from Bethesda. So you might wonder, why then did I open this scene this way? Why did I introduce this? Well, my thought was that it might explain why Philip hesitated, okay, and sought out Andrew's help in taking these Greeks to Jesus for some reason, and we're not given that reason. But there's nothing wrong with trying to glean something out of that, something that might encourage us. So I thought, well, in the beginning, we remind ourselves that the national environment at that time should be remembered first. We need to remind ourselves of that. The Jews were not eager, okay, to entertain or to help the Gentiles. That wasn't their purpose. Nationalities conflict with people. And so that might have been an influence on Philip's part. And also, Jesus had instructed his disciples not to go in the way of the Gentiles. Jeff, I'll give you that reading, Matthew 10, and we'll discuss both of these passages as thoughts come up. 5 to verse 7. I'll give that to you, Jeff.
These 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, "Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand."
Okay. And remember now, I'm having us try and put ourselves in Philip's shoes, what he's thinking. Okay? We've seen the national environment. Jews don't bother with Gentiles, with the Samaritans. And here now, Jesus has told his disciples, his apostles, that go rather to the house, to the lost sheep of Israel. And the lost sheep of Israel, of course, are, I had some thoughts for that. Maybe we'll look at that right now, because Matthew 15 is a challenging thought. But this here, what Jeff just read to, is sometimes referred to as the first commission. Okay, it was limited in what people the 12 apostles were to go to. All people that were not full-blooded Jews were regarded as Gentiles and Samaritans. And Samaritans really were distinguished from Gentiles because they were a mixed race. Okay, they were part Jew and part Gentile, both in blood and religion. And Israel, though, were the lost sheep that Jesus is speaking about. And he is sending the apostles, his 12, to the lost sheep of Israel, because when you think about it, their leaders, the religious leaders of that time, had neglected to teach them correctly. They weren't teaching them what they should have. And the kingdom was near, of course, it's at hand, as Jesus said there, but it wasn't yet in existence. John the Baptist is dead, okay, now, but he taught the same thing, that the kingdom was at hand, and John actually said, make ready the way of the Lord. So that this whole scene, to me, would be on Philip's mind. He would be thinking of this. And so Jesus declares his mission, as I said, as being sent to the house of Israel only. So let's go to Matthew 15 now. Matthew 15 and verses 21 to 28. Do you want to start with you, Tammy, and we'll read 3 verses each, please.
Then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Then he answered her not a word, and his disciples came and urged him, saying, Send her away, for she cries out after us.
There you go, Bill. There you go.
Oh, okay. It was hard to hear.
I can hear, but yeah. I can hear.
Now, this is a tough passage here, but I believe it fits in well with Philip's mind here, his thinking. Matthew states here that a woman from Cana, okay, which is a Gentile, and remember, Matthew is writing to the Jews, so he makes this stipulation from where she is from. And it seems that by not answering her at first, Jesus, to me, is testing her faith. And I believe he's maybe also waiting to see the reaction of his disciples here. And remember, if you have a comment, to put your hand up. But to me, the prejudices of the Jewish society comes to my mind here. Okay? And maybe Jesus was hoping, for one thing, that human love and kindness might have moved the hearts of his disciples. Because as we read, this woman's daughter is severely demon-possessed. She is not in a good way. And the mother is pleading, begging, if you will, for her daughter's sanity, for her healing from Jesus. And it's interesting to note that they, okay, not Jesus, were the ones who spoke up first. Okay? Jesus didn't answer her a word when she spoke to him. But his disciples speak up, and they want Jesus to send her away. And I believe it's in light of their attitude that we need to look at this difficult passage. That's my thought. Because, first of all, Jesus' first reply confirmed why the disciples had this attitude. It was the attitude of that era. But we will see that Jesus is going to give this woman a chance to demonstrate her faith. That is what I see. Jesus wants to understand what she is thinking of. Jeff?
Well, first of all, from Jesus' perspective, probably good to remember what we learned in John 12.
Okay.
Because we looked at the first part with Philip, but we didn't actually look at what Jesus had said. And what he said in the next few sentences, from verse 23 up to 32, is basically, to paraphrase it all.
What chapter are you in?
John 12, where you started.
Oh, okay.
We just read up to where Jesus started to speak. But when we look at what Jesus actually says in 23 to 32, he's basically referring to his death on the cross,
Right.
He refers it to, he calls it a grain of wheat that goes in the ground and dies, and then it produces fruit.
Exactly.
He's referring to his death on the cross. And finally, in verse 32, he says plainly that if he is lifted up from the earth on the cross, that he'll draw all people to himself.
Right.
So his mission was to come to Israel, call them to repentance. That's
Right.
what he came for. So it's logical that he stayed within those boundaries of what his father had sent him to do. He came to Israel to call them to repentance. But the cross was the time where all people would be called.
Right. And the cross hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, well, exactly right. He's looking at it right now in those verses.
Right.
20, he's telling them
Right.
it's coming shortly. But now when you talk about that Gentile woman, I believe, yes, you're right. He is showing his disciples something. He's staying within the boundaries of his mission to stay with people
Right.
of Israel. But if a Gentile woman is willing to express her faith, he would not turn her away.
Exactly.
So that will teach the disciples something.
Exactly. But what I'm trying, we know that, and that's correct, that those are all good points. But I'm trying to get us to put ourselves in Philip's shoes. What is Philip thinking? You know, Jesus has already told them that he's come only to the house of Israel. And by this time now, what the apostles have seen should have them thinking, and as I say in this case here, human kindness and nature really should have been on their minds. They might have said something different to Jesus, because in verse 25, then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. Now, I don't know about you, but if we do our best to put ourselves in this situation here, as I said, she's losing her daughter. She doesn't know where else to go. But what she has heard of Jesus, her faith is in him, that you can do something. You can help me. And it makes me wonder why the disciples didn't step up in her defense after hearing her begging for her child's life. And
We have two things here I think we need to consider about this time. One you've raised, which it's very hard to get over culture. It really is. When it comes to culture, the Jews, it is so ingrained in them. You don't speak, like as far as even going back to Ezra and Nehemiah's day, when as far as like Nehemiah was so angry with them for taking pagan wives, and I think they took it way too far after that. And like as far as that generation would have taught their generations and so on and so on.
right.
But here's another thing that I think we do need to pay attention to, because it comes up again at the resurrection. This woman's a woman. And sometimes women were just not listened to. She's coming, she's bugging you. Get her out of here. So not only was he a Gentile, she had one strike against her.
Right.
She was also a woman. And so I think some of that probably plays into what the disciples were thinking, because you think, well, why would the disciples act this way? Jesus is to correct them. This is what Jesus is going to do. He's giving them the example, all right? You don't turn these people away. If they're coming to me in faith, you don't turn women away, you don't turn Gentiles away.
Right.
If they're coming in faith, that is.
Exactly. They've made the human error, I believe, of just not understanding and thinking out the purpose. And also, it's interesting that Jesus didn't refuse to help her in these first few remarks. All he said was he was sent to Israel. And as we think about that, could not Israel have helped a person of another race? And especially one that is here worshiping Jesus and begging for his help. And the disciples really thought, I believe, that Jesus was going to get rid of her, but instead, through his actions, he was going to get rid of their prejudiced attitude. At least help them see. And then in verse 27, Jesus now at this stage in his mission, if you recall, was being refused even by his own nation. They refused to see Jesus for who he was. And here is a foreigner, okay, showing wondrous faith. Because the mother is begging Jesus, but she's begging him because she knows that she can help. And then, of course, down through the reading, Jesus used the word dogs, okay? But the woman used a different word meaning a little dog. In other words, a puppy. She was the little one, and that kind, as she told Jesus, could stay under the table eating the dropped scraps. This is the illusion that we're seeing. So she's saying that you must be able to help me. And it's interesting that she bypassed the 12 apostles. She didn't even speak to them because she states at the master's table, which shows her direct appeal to Jesus. And then in the end, of course, we know the story. The woman finds her daughter healed. And imagine how she felt. And one is led to wonder, my thought is, if the apostles ever remembered this scene in later days, especially Peter. Because if you remember, it took a miracle, didn't it, to convince Peter that the Gentiles should be admitted into the Lord's kingdom. But having said all that and read that, for our benefit, Jeff, you want to go first then?
It was the uncircumcised Gentiles.
Yes.
Not Gentiles, because there were Gentile proselytes. They were perfectly fine with you becoming a proselyte and then becoming a Christian.
Right.
Right.
Why that point?
He was trying to say not all Gentiles. They didn't have a problem with Gentiles who weren't Jews. Like
you mean the Jewish people?
Yes. Jewish
Oh,
people.
no.
Yeah.
No. The prejudiceness, no. Grecian Jews were accepted.
Or proselytes.
Or proselytes. They were accepted. It was, the common scene was the Gentiles.
Yeah.
The prejudiceness was the Gentiles, yeah.
Well, in Acts, the focus is on their uncircumcision.
Yes.
Because it says it specifically in chapter 11.
Right.
When Peter recounts it, he said the uncircumcised Gentiles.
Right.
That was the problem. That was the issue. They were not circumcised.
Right.
So it went beyond, of course there'd be a problem with Gentiles, but it went beyond that. Even they were uncircumcised. That means absolutely 100%
right.
stay away from the uncircumcised.
Okay, right. And that adds to the point of confusion that the apostles could be in. That's what I'm saying.
But
it's,
as far as this particular one we're looking at, it is a little bit difficult to consider what is going through the minds of the apostles.
Oh, of course.
Because what they have seen is, if we actually look at what it says in 22 and 23, she was crying out, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David." But Jesus didn't answer a word.
And I made that,
So
yes.
So they would observe that.
Right.
Hard to say why. They wonder, why is Jesus not saying a word to her? But anyways, it was at that point that they decided to urge Jesus just to send her away.
Right. Yeah.
But
It,
like
and
you say, this is an opportunity for them to learn that if she showed persistence and faithfulness,
right.
then Jesus would show mercy and respond.
Exactly.
First, he expected her to make the effort and be persistent.
Exactly. And everything, I mean, they've been walking with Jesus now for some time. So they really are coming to an understanding of his purpose here upon the earth. But yet, we're in the same boat. We're living in a world that refuses any kind of God's wisdom and judgment. So we need to understand the whole purpose of Christ. Jerry?
But I find it quite interesting here in Jesus. He did three things. He wasn't mistreating her. But he did three things that if she wasn't persistent, would have turned someone off. He didn't speak
It-
to her, so
Right.
he ignored her. It seemed like he was ignoring her. Then he said, well, I'm not sent to you. I'm sent to Israel. And then he said about it's not good for the children's bread, take the children's bread and throw it to dogs and little dogs.
Right.
And so, like as far as if she really didn't have faith, this was a test of her faith to show the apostles about persistence. Yes, because if she had just had heard about Jesus and really, well, maybe he can do this, maybe he can't. We'd probably in today's society say she'd probably be offended. Like we can, you look at someone the wrong way today and they can get offended. Imagine all of this happening and she still persisted. In fact, she took Jesus' analogy and said, all right, I agree, but we can take the scraps, can't we?
Yeah.
And that shows you her faith, and it shows the disciples about maybe about their faith too, persistence in their faith, and because it teaches all of us about persistence, and faith.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And prejudices.
Yeah.
Also, doesn't it? And we have the privilege of reading this laid out for us, and we've also have the privilege of the whole life of Jesus laid out for us. But remember, these apostles are just walking day to day, and what is involved in their life and in their thinking. We know the end of the story, where they didn't. And so the whole goal, my whole goal, is to have us look at their character, look at some of their mistakes, and learn something from it for us. And so, like I said, that was, we did go through it all, that passage, but it's good. It's a hard passage. If you read some thoughts on it, there's an awful lot of crazy thoughts come from here, but we understand from it that Christ's purpose is for all nations, salvation for all nations, and the apostles have to understand that, and we have to understand that. And as far as prejudices go, maybe we don't, we shy away from that word. We use the more satisfying sounding word of stereotyping. Prejudice is bad, but sometimes we seem to think that stereotyping people, that's not so bad. It's kind of maybe like a joke, but no. And we see that from Jesus's actions.
Prejudice is prejudged. No one likes to judge today.
Right.
I prejudged? How dare you? Like as far as that's what people say, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. And that can creep into our thinking as Christians. So then, we've probably covered this part, but Jesus' instructions along these lines only pertain to the apostles for this time, going to Israel first. That's what Jesus was sent for. He was sent to direct them. Okay? And the purpose of the apostles' mission was to counteract all the corrupt false teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees at that time, and to turn the hearts of the people to their Messiah. And the commission to take the gospel to all nations, okay, had not yet been given. And the apostles need to understand, or they're not getting the full picture, the whole picture yet. Jesus has not died upon the cross yet, and has not given them their commission. And so they are being affected by some of this thinking. And well, I was saving that passage till here, but we've already finished it. So the thought was, remember, the apostles are in training. Okay, that's simply all they're doing. They're learning. And we need to examine ourselves accordingly as we learn from their mistakes. And so we move on then from that thought. We'll go to John 14, verses 1 to 14. John 14, 1 to 14. Maybe we take 3 verses each. Do you want to read, Francis? Begin with you, please.
Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to you, Sandra, please.
Which verse was that?
7. You're starting at 7.
7.
If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on you know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us. Jesus said to him, Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, Show us the Father?
Okay, come up to Phoebe.
Do you not believe
Oh,
that I am
sorry.
in the Father, and the Father in me? The words that I speak to you, I do not speak of my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does the work. Believe me in that I am in the Father, and the Father in me, or else believe me for the sake of the work himself.
Phoebe.
Most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. And whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, sorry to Wilbur, a broken shoulder doesn't affect reading. So let's thank him for that. But okay, in this passage here, we'll see what we can get through with it. Thinking here now, this is at the end, almost the end of Christ's time. 3 years, okay, Philip's been 3 years, all the apostles have been 3 years of walking with Jesus. They've seen 3 years of countless miracles, sermons, acts of love, and that's all coming to a close now, okay? They've heard countless teachings to the 12. Jesus has held countless teachings with the 12 on the unity that he has with the Father. And now he's telling them that he is returning to the Father. He's going back to the Father. And Philip, if you recall, Philip was one of the first, okay, who chose to follow Jesus. And at this point here, he asks a question, and he says, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Think about that. What kind of a statement is that? Now, this is an apostle that's been with Jesus. And we don't say that in a ridicule manner. This is just showing, again, human confusion. Do you have your hand, Jeff?
Yeah, well, just personally, when I see that, I know what I have a tendency to want or to think, and quite often we want just a little more. So I can't exactly be sure, but I do like to consider what might have went through their minds. And if I look at myself, I like a little great. I like a little more. Sometimes I feel like I don't have quite enough that I need.
Exactly.
The Lord may think I have enough that I need, but I seem to say, if a little more, if I had a little more, I would be better off. I would be more equipped.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a human nature, isn't it? Jer?
And yet, Jesus here, it sort of his response, like as far as what prompted the question, is that if you've known me, or if you know me, you know the Father. And then Philip says, well, show us the Father. And Jesus, I've been with you this long and you don't know me? Like as far as that's you can almost hear the discouragement in Jesus' voice when he asked the question, because Jesus had just said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Right. We didn't want to jump there yet,
I'm sorry.
but we will. Still with Jeff's thought, Philip has weighed all information, but thought just a little more would be enough. Is that something totally absurd to us, our thinking? No, isn't it? How often do we think of that? And we'll just end this thought with Jesus. We'll pick up next week then. But Jesus answers him and us in a way. Have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? You know, and that, that's not the voice that maybe Jesus spoke into there. He didn't come down on Philip, but he said it in a manner that Philip would have thought, And Jesus says, he who has seen me has seen the Father. And how can you say, show us the Father?
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to